Vonnie and I started our Minnesota adventures with the purchase of this little house that sat on 120 acres of land. The land was probably had 30 acres of high ground you could actually mow, and then the rest of it was back in the brush and the swamps of northern Minnesota. And it had butted state land, so it was back on a dead-end road also. This is what it looked like when we made our purchase. What it was there was a couple up there, kind of like homesteaders, trying to live off the land, and they had goats and horses and a team, and they hoped to live that way and grow their own vegetables, but they found out the climate in northern Minnesota was a little harsh, so they purchased some property in Missouri and sold this place to us. As we wrote up the final details of the sale, it was agreed that since it was late in the fall, they would stay there until spring before they had to move. I had a long weekend off work early in April, so Vonnie and I, we made the trip up, and we were able to visit with them for a few days as they were doing their last packing, and we got to spend our first real time at our new property. We told everyone that we'd purchased a goat farm, and we weren't telling a lie. They had numerous goats and ponies and different wildlife around there when we stopped in to visit. Since they used that horse somewhat for some of their work, they had a lot of horse-drawn equipment around and other antique machinery that we actually put to some pretty good use over the years. And there was an old Alice Chalmers tractor there that I agreed to buy from him for $100. It had a crack block and a few other issues, but we made it work for a long time. They had enough goats around there that they didn't have any problem with keeping the grass and the vegetation down, but as we were to find out, with all those goat droppings on the ground, that grass grew very well in their absence. Our first trip of the year was usually mid-June to early July, when the auto factory would be shutting down for the summer changeover. And by that time the vegetation was good and high. It took a lot of work to get it knocked down, and I was too cheap to have somebody come out and keep it mowed down for us. I would use the hand crank and fire up this old Alice WC, and if I cleaned the spark plugs, I could get it to run on 3 cylinders, maybe 4, but most of the time it putted around like a John Deere on 2 cylinders, but it had enough power to pull those horse-drawn sickle mowers. The mower did a really good job of mowing down that high grass and hay, and then we would hook up there was a dump rake there too that we would drag it into piles, and made some compost out of that over the years. They would get it knocked down, and then we could attack it with a regular lawnmower. The inside of the house was rustic, but it was really to our liking. They'd left the beams exposed over the kitchen, the big kitchen, and then the living room had a little actually wood stove in there for heat, and a good brick chimney that heated up nice. And a lot of time was spent here, and this is our International Harvester refrigerator, as I recall, the little one, but still working fine. And upstairs there were a few bedrooms. Eventually we put some paneling up and cleaned things up a bit more. Most of our trips north when we went up on vacation were with a van. We took advantage of that, and we would load up paneling from the big box stores down here, and a lot of items for rummage sales and different things to help decorate, and Vonnie did a good job of spiffing the place up inside. There was no indoor plumbing. There was a hand pump outside, and the kitchen had sinks with a drain that just took the water outside and dropped it in the ground. And we had an outhouse, and the outhouse was built for the folks that were there a little shorter than us, so we had to kind of back in and try to avoid when he had it, the electric fencer apparatus that sat in there. We owned 120 acres, but as I said, it sat pretty much surrounded on the backsides by state land, so I had plenty of areas to go out and cut trails. And this one is where this is what I call my coffee trails. They were just out the back door of the house. I like to go out in the morning and have a place to stroll. We had no children of our own, but we were in no short supply of kids that would like to come up and spend their vacations with us, and I would turn them loose on that old WC tractor and that horse-drawn mower, and I like to say I just let them mow to their heart's content. There were always numerous friends stopping in with their campers and such, or sleeping in the house with us to share our times up there. And of course, if we were in Minnesota, we had to go fishing. It was after a good productive day and a big fish fry coming up. we soon discovered the joy of spending our evenings out with the car, or me and the mountain bike, and we'd go out and we'd travel these miles and miles of forest roads, and we'd come across black bear and bobcats, and there were a lot of moose in the area back then too, so made for some very enjoyable rides. We made our first winter trip to the farmhouse Christmas in 1980, and my friend Tim standing there on the right and friend Jeff on the left, and then there was another character along that we just called him Dirty Dick, and Vonnie was along, and with all that gang up, these guys decided they wanted to go out hunting snowshoe hares, and so we headed across the field, and we were kind of a little ways apart, and this snowshoe hare jumped up and started running around amongst us, and people kind of looked at it, and friend Tim, he wasn't carrying a gun, but he just reached down and picked it up. Those winter visits were becoming a highlight of some of our years up there, and of course the cabin hadn't come into being yet for us, but we wanted to sleep out on a really cold night one night, so that's friend Gary on the right there, I think, and he's going to take us out, and he's going to show us how to properly sleep out in really cold temperatures. So we just hiked down the road about a half a mile, or we got back in some trees and set up a nice overnight camp. So over the years, the house went from this little thing with no paint on it that we started with, and turned into this, and made some improvements, you might say, but some things we never changed. And one friend of mine, he was just disgusted because he could not imagine why anyone would have an outhouse and have a satellite dish on that same house. It just, he could not understand that. And then that fateful day when I stumbled upon that old log cabin back in the forest, and we were able to purchase it, and we spent that first night back there, back in home, and I just jokingly told my wife, I said, well, we're getting rid of this dump, meaning the old farmhouse there. I said, we got to go back to that cabin. For quite a few years then we had both places, but Vonnie encouraged me maybe not to sell the farmhouse till after I retired, and I was sure that I wanted to do that. But by the time I retired, I knew that my heart was at the old log cabin in the forest, and we sold the farmette to some deer hunters.